Before the sun had even considered rising over Ouagadougou, the city lay draped in thick, suffocating darkness. The only signs of life came from scattered kerosene lamps flickering like dying stars across the densely packed neighborhoods where the people of Burkina Faso made their lives stretch beyond scarcity. In a dimly lit office miles from the glitter of political power, President Ibrahim Traoré sat hunched over his desk, the weak light casting sharp shadows across papers that made his stomach churn with every line. The Ministry of Social Affairs claimed efficiency in its latest reports, clean data, polished language, hopeful numbers, but he knew better. The real stories came from his late-night sources, from the mothers in rural provinces, from the emaciated teachers, from the children eating one meal every 2 days. Then, at 5:47 a.m., his thoughts were pierced by a shrill ring. The call came through the humid air like an omen. The voice was disguised, masked electronically, but the words were clear and surgical in their precision. The Sankara estate. Go see where the children's money is really going. The name hit him like a slap. Minister Sankara, the same man who had stood beside him just months ago, sleeves rolled up, eyes wet with emotion at an orphanage where 37 children clung to a dream on 12 narrow beds. The same man who had thundered about justice, transparency, and compassion for the vulnerable. Traoré's hand trembled as he scribbled down the coordinates. The betrayal felt personal. As the convoy cut through the still sleeping city, shadows stretched long on the cracked streets, and Traoré stared silently out the window, feeling the same bitter pattern he had witnessed in Mali and Guinea. Always promises. Always tears. And always, eventually, the theft. Yet with Sankara, he had hoped that a former schoolteacher with fire in his speeches and dirt still on his boots might be different. As dawn approached, the first golden slivers of light crept across the hills. The capital shrank in the rear view as the SUVs climbed into the affluent outskirts, green spaces, wide roads, silence. His intelligence chief, Captain Ouedraogo, broke the silence with a grave update. Property records had been traced. The estate in question had been purchased through a shell company registered in the Seychelles 8 months ago. The exact month the new aid distribution system, Sankara's anti-corruption reform, was launched. The money trail led back to 3 separate international aid accounts. It was no reform. It was a siphon. Rage built slowly in Traoré's chest as they approached the property. Through the haze of early morning dust, he saw it, an enormous compound rising from red earth, its marble columns catching the light like monuments to hypocrisy. Cement mixers churned. Machines roared. And then, in the debris and construction chaos, he saw movement. Children. Small, fragile bodies hauling buckets, pushing wheelbarrows, their limbs too thin, their faces locked in a kind of exhausted trance. One boy, no older than 12, struggled to lift a bag of cement. His clothes hung off him in rags, and he moved with a weariness no child should ever carry. These weren't workers' kids tagging along at the site. These were laborers, enslaved by the very system that claimed to rescue them. Captain Ouedraogo whispered, "My God, those are children." Traoré's jaw tightened as he watched. This wasn't a mansion. This was a mausoleum being built from stolen dreams. As the convoy slowed before massive wrought iron gates, a jittery security guard reached for his radio, panic flickering across his face. Beyond the bars stretched the full horror of the estate, an enormous complex with multiple wings, circular drives, landscaped grounds still in progress, and in the far distance, the shimmering blue of a swimming pool. A paradise built on broken backs. The aid that should have built schools, stocked clinics, and fed orphans, had instead bought marble columns and chlorinated water. And the children had paid for every inch of it with their hands. As Traoré stepped out of his vehicle, the clamor of construction faded into an eerie silence. The rhythmic pounding of hammers and grinding of cement mixers stuttered to a halt as workers took notice of the military convoy, the stern expressions of the security officers, and the unmistakable silhouette of the nation's leader stepping onto the dust-covered ground. Even the children, weary from long hours of labor, paused mid-task. Their small eyes, ringed with dust and fatigue, widened in disbelief. They had seen this man on television, the one who spoke of justice, who vowed to protect them. From a prefab office at the edge of the site, Minister Sankara emerged like a ghost, his tailored suit absurdly pristine against the grit and ruin of the construction zone. His confident posture shriveled the moment he locked eyes with Traoré. His hands began to tremble as blood drained from his face. The two men stood motionless, locked in a stare that carried the weight of betrayal and shattered ideals. One a revolutionary forged in sacrifice, the other a hypocrite wrapped in expensive fabric and false promises. Captain Ouedraogo's radio crackled again, cruelly reminding them of reality. Another orphanage in Kaya was shutting down. 43 children would be tossed to the streets like trash, their futures dissolved by greed. Traoré began walking, each boot crunching across the gravel like a funeral drumbeat. The ornate iron gates creaked open slowly, as if even the metal resisted what lay beyond. The marble-inlaid courtyard shimmered in the sun, but to Traoré, it felt like walking over the graves of the country's forgotten children. All labor ceased. The children huddled in groups, watching in fearful silence, their eyes darting between the predator and the protector. Sankara forced a smile as Traoré approached, but it melted before it reached his lips. "Captain Traoré," he stammered, voice cracking, "what an unexpected pleasure! I was just inspecting your investment." But Traoré's voice, cold and sharp, cut through the morning air. His hand pointed toward the skeletal mansion behind him, gleaming fixtures imported from Europe, Italian marble mocking their poverty. "Tell me, Minister," he asked, each word landing like a blow, "how does a schoolteacher on 30,000 francs a month afford Italian marble?" Construction workers stepped back into the shadows, and Traoré's eyes shifted to the children again. One girl, no older than 14, crouched behind a cement mixer, her dust-covered school uniform in tatters. She should have been in a classroom, not buried under bags of mortar. Her silence told the truth that no document could hide. Sankara's throat bobbed as he struggled to speak. "Captain, I can explain. This is a legitimate venture, a partnership with international investors. The paperwork, everything, is in order." But Traoré was already pulling a folded document from his coat. "You mean the Seychelles shell company that received 2.3 million euros from the EU Emergency Aid Fund?" he asked, his voice like stone. "The same fund earmarked for orphans and medical supplies?" Sankara stood frozen, the last traces of color fleeing from his face. Behind him, Captain Ouedraogo gave quiet orders: secure the perimeter, photograph everything. The lie was over. The truth stood in the dust, in the eyes of children who had built a palace they would never enter, under the rule of men who had long since sold their souls.